Alright students, hello again. This is the last video for week 3, and this one of course is still having to do with the source evaluation. This one specifically is going to be about the whole class activity, which is called BEAM activity, B-E-A-M. So we're going to look at what that means and how to do the activity, and let's get right into it. So let's go ahead and get that out of the way. So when you go into this BEAM activity, you will see a link to click on. When you click on this link, it will bring up your source here. Now this source basically comes directly from the textbook. This is in the textbook on page 18. The same zip here. And here on page 25, as you can see, this is the actual text. So when you see those page numbers, wait a minute, where's it at? Here it is. There we go. Joseph Bizup is the guy who came up with this idea of BEAM. And so if you wanted to, you could actually go and look at his actual book and see more about it yourself if you want. But when you see the page numbers in here for 73 and 75, those are references to his actual text. That thing that they're references to this actual text. So let's get right into it. So first thing that you need to understand that what is BEAM? BEAM framework. It's the framework that this guy Joseph Bizup came up with. He was a researcher. He may still be alive, I'm sure, but he was a researcher and writing scholar. And he talked about primary sources and secondary and tertiary sources. And the quick rundown of what that means: primary source is the person who did all the work to come up with something. For example, let's take a scientist, for example. So if a scientist does spends weeks, months in the lab trying to come up with doing these experiments to try to come up with some sort of an answer to his hypothesis, right? You all probably know that word. And then he decides to write a paper about what he found. He would be what you would consider a primary source. So if you were writing a paper and you actually used his work, then he would be your primary source. Now, let's say somebody else takes his primary source and uses it as a source to write their own paper, and let's say that's maybe another scientist or somebody in that, more of an expert, who writes a journal article about what that primary source discovered in his or her research. That person would be the secondary source because they didn't do the footwork. They just used that person's work to do their own work, to do their work. So if you were to use them as a source for your paper, for example, then they would be a secondary source because they didn't do the footwork, right? Now, let's say somebody else. Let's say another person. Let's say maybe a writer for a magazine. Let's say a technology or science magazine that you could buy maybe in a bookstore. Let's say that is the source you use, and that source used either the secondary source's information or maybe even used the primary source's information to do their work, but you using that tertiary source to use your work, to do your work, they would be a tertiary source for you to be used. So I know that's a little cool. It probably doesn't sound real sensible, but just remember, the person who does all the work, that person is the best source because he did the work, right? He's the primary source. Anybody else that writes about his work is secondary or even tertiary, right? So whenever possible, it's always obviously going to be best to use the primary sources when you can find them. But when you can't find the primary, maybe go with a secondary source like a journal, right, or something like that. And that's kind of how that works. But one thing he says, one thing that bothered him was that those classifications didn't really help students understand how to use the sources. So he came up with this BEAM. BEAM stands for background, exhibit or think explanation or explication or example. That's a good way to think of it as example. Argument and methods. Background is just what it sounds like. This is sources that you would use to help you talk about maybe how a particular topic came to be a problem. When did that topic first happen, and when did it become controversial? Why did it become controversial? So the background stuff is just like the history of it, things like that, right? The things that would help you to write maybe background information. Then, if you're using a source to help you provide examples of something or interpret something, those will be exhibit, right? That'd be E. If your source that you're using helps to discuss the argument itself, to affirm or dispute or refine or extend an argument, the argument itself, then that would be A for argument. Think of these sources as ones that provide evidence supporting or weakening the author, an author's claims. Whereas this one is examples that provide examples of something that the author is writing about. Now, the one that's the trickiest is methods, because methods doesn't really work the same way as these three. These three are all about the source and the argument, whereas the method source allows you to explain some sort of governing concept that from which your writing is coming from, or a manner of working. In other words, a way your approach to what you're writing about. So if you have a source, in order to help you identify a particular approach, or for example, here it's about a term or concept. So this person, let's say this writer is using a source to help explain to his audience or her audience what feminism is about, so that they would understand that feminist approach. That would be a method, because it would be a way for you to describe your perspective that you're coming from, right? Another example might be, let's say you wanted to, and this was kind of basic, but it might still give you an idea. Let's say you wanted to write about a particular topic from the perspective of a undergrad student or a graduate student. You might want to define, just for those who have never gone to college, maybe don't understand what grad versus undergrad is, you might define what does it mean to be an undergraduate versus a graduate. That would help your audience understand from that perspective you're coming from as an undergrad or a grad. And if you have a source to back that up, let's say you have a source that simply defines what it means to be an undergrad, that source would be your M source, your methods source. Hopefully that all makes sense. If it doesn't, you can look into it more. You can look up his book and read it and get more from him. Or you could even maybe do a Google search for you might be able to find do a Google search and find somebody who's doing a better job than I did of describing what the B, E, A, and M are and how they work. That's up to you. But if you feel like you understand it just based on what I've just told you, then you can get right into this whole class activity. So the whole class activity is going to be a few different steps here. The first step, you're going to read this stuff up here that I already told you. That's on page 18. Then you're going to choose one of your sources. Again, this has to be one of the sources you have chosen to do your ABIB with. So this will be one of your actual sources that you're going to use for your annotated bib. And what you're going to do is you're going to go down here below, and you're going to start down in here. Here's an example again of what it should look like. You're going to start down here where it says complete your own work below. And what you're going to do is you're going to go down there and you're going to put your name and the source, and then you're going to put down a quote, write in a quote from one of those sources, for that source, to illustrate B, E, A, or M, right? At the end of your quoted material, you're going to state which of those it is, B, E, A, or M, and why. How do you believe it fits within being a background or example or an argument or a methods source? Steps 1 through 4 should be completed by Thursday night. So as always, you have two due dates. Your initial post should be due no later than Thursday midnight. Then once you have posted yours, you should go and find, you up here, go down through the list that's below here, and find one of your peers' responses to comment on. Then by Sunday, you will write a comment to that one peer. You don't have to do this to two peers, just one. So after you've posted your own, you'll go and you'll find somebody else's sometime between Thursday and Sunday night. You'll find one of your peers' posts that you think is interesting and you'd like to talk about it. And then you just provide a good 3 to 4 sentences, maybe 5 sentences, where you tell them what you think about it. Give them some good, thoughtful feedback about that post, about how they use it. Tell them what you think is good about it and why. Maybe even suggest to them, if you feel like their source is not really what they think it is, you might tell them that and why. Or you might say something like, well, I think your source could also be this one. And let's say they provided it as B or example. You might say something like, well, I could also see yours fitting A argument because it does this, this, and this, right? So anything you want to say about it, but just make sure it's good and thoughtful feedback. At least 4 or 5 sentences would be preferable. And remember, you're only having to do this with one, so take your time, give them good, thorough feedback so that you don't have to do 2 of these, right? And then tell them, what's good about it and why, followed by whether or not you agree with their assertion and why. And so in either one of these places, probably in this place, you could maybe add your own thoughts about, maybe it could be something different also. Maybe you could cover A as well as E. Or, so, in other words, give them some good solid feedback based on this. Now, here's the example. I did in my example about methods just to help you understand that one a little bit better, right? So let's say you put your name down here. I used green as usual, and I put I put my name down. I put the sources from Cornell Law School, and then I put the quote from it. Now this is made up. Don't go looking for this because you probably aren't going to find anything like this because I just made it up. I didn't want to go and do all that extra work to try to come up with it, try to find something real. So I just made it up because I figured it'd be quick and easy to do. So I'm saying that this is from Cornell Law School, and then what it says here, this is my made-up quote. As used in the Constitution, liberty means freedom from arbitrary and unreasonable restraint upon an individual. And then I say that I believe it's methods because I'm going to use this definition in my report to show how liberty is viewed specifically by the U.S. legal system. So that tells you that's methods. That's how methods work, right? So it's not about the topic so much as it's about my methodology that I'm going to be doing in my report to help my audience understand something better. In this case, how liberty is understood by the U.S. legal system. Now, after you've done that, you're going to go and you're going to comment on somebody else's. So I just made up a name here of the person who commented on mine, and this is what your comment might look like for somebody else. I put Joe Cool says, "Hey Jim, I really think that you've got a great example here for methods. Your source is strong since it's from Cornell Law School, and the quoted material defines what the word liberty means from that lawyer's perspective. This indeed would help your audience understand how liberty is used in a legal case versus how it might be used, say, in discussing general freedoms, such as freedoms that are allowed in the workplace, or et cetera, et cetera." Great job. So, that's the kind of thing you want to do to, show your person, whoever you're commenting on, that you really appreciate what he's written. You qualify it by talking about how it really, makes sense. You give examples from it to show how it makes sense, and then give him some kudos. Great job, awesome job. I really like what you've done here. However you want to do it, but give them some good feedback and good, and give them some kudos. Make them feel good about themselves, because that helps them, builds them up, and obviously you want somebody to do that for you too, right? You want them to build you up when they comment on yours. So do that, all right? And then of course just make sure you do all your work below here. Put your name in different colors, and make so that it stands out from the other people's writing. And do the best you can on here, and Let me know what you think about these things. I hope you all are appreciating these whole class activities. I've had students in the past who tell me they liked it because it gave them, it sort of like came as close as possible to feeling like you're in the class and working with somebody in class. You know, like for seat work, you know, peer review or peer work, peer-to-peer work. So let me know what you think about it. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, tell me why. Maybe give me some ideas of how you think it would be better. But that will do it for this video. 15 minutes, a little bit longer again than I expected. But again, I like to really make sure I give you lots of information and details. So if you have questions, as always, just let me know.